Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's ACMA webinar brought to you by the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs and Smart Health. Today's online webinar is focused on medical affairs, evidence generation, and bridging the gap, leading the way in the Middle East and the Gulf region. My name is William Solomon. I'm the founder and the CEO of the ACMA. I'm super excited to be here today and to be able to talk about evidence generation within the Middle East, North Africa region. I can see that folks are still joining in, so we're going to give folks about a minute until we get started. So stay tuned for about a minute. All right, so it looks like we've had folks now beginning to pour in and join in. So we'll go ahead and get it started again. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the ACMA and Smart Health, our partner in the Middle East region. So again, our focus today is going to be on evidence generation and bridging the gap. As we all know, this topic in particular is really important to medical affairs. And I'm excited today to be joined by colleagues of mine who are really leaders within medical affairs in the Middle East region. And I'm going to start out by introducing them momentarily. First, we have Dr. Hazem Youssry Wahba, who has a lot of experience in the industry. Dr. Hazem, if you want to maybe take a second to just introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Dr. William and SMA, for inviting me today to speak in this engaging webinar. And as you highlighted, that evidence generation in medical affairs in the Middle East, I do believe is a great value and interest to our audience. And it's truly a pleasure and honor to be here with all of you today. So I'm Hazem Wahba. I'm a pharmacist with a PharmD degree, and I bring almost 14 years of experience in the pharma industry, including a decade, about 10 years dedicated to medical affairs. So throughout my journey, I have had the opportunity to work in different roles, including MSL, medical advisor, medical lead, and therapy area medical head, along with experience in medical governance and real-world evidence. So I look forward to having a fruitful and productive discussion with all of you today. I'm always happy to participate with my colleagues, Dr. Amer and Dr. Arsalan as well. So thank you a lot.
Very good. We're so excited to have you. Thank you, Dr. Hazem. Next, we have Dr. Ahmed Siddik, who I'm really excited to have a lot of great experience. Dr. Ahmed, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Solomon. My name is Amer Siddik. I'm a physician. I hold a master's degree in cancer biology and therapy. I've been working in this industry, particularly medical affairs, for almost more than 10 years. Currently, I'm heading the medical affairs team in Takeda for the West Gulf cluster, which comprises of Saudi Arabia, Oman, Bahrain, and Qatar. It's truly an honor for me to be here with eminent panelists discussing one of my favorite topics, which is evidence generation in medical affairs. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Welcome. And then we have finally Dr. Arsalan Mohammad. Dr. Arsalan, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible, and the whole
Yeah, we
credit
can hear
goes
you.
to ACMA. Thank you. The whole credit goes to ACMA and Smart Health. This is much needed topic to discuss and to have a debate on. This is Arsalan. I'm the country medical lead for Pfizer. I've been in the industry for the last 16 years. Please don't judge my age. I still look young. And I've been through several several positions within the commercial medical affairs for last 14 years, through MSL, medical lead, medical advisor, manager. So whatever you can name it, I might have tasted that sweet dish within the medical affairs. I really be looking forward to have the discussion and to have come up with at least one action point for each and everyone to practice within the real world, a job setting, or whatever we are doing to 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 take it further. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Arsalan. All right, and I love that you said that because from my perspective, that's what it's all about, right? The ACMA is always focused on providing information that's practical, that you can actually apply to your day-to-day role. This is why the ACMA today is in over 80 countries with over 30,000 users on our learning platform. I know many of you listening in know us because of our board certification program within medical affairs and all the work that we do with medical affairs teams around training, AI, and certification. So, really excited to be here. One of the questions that came up before we get started is, would this session be recorded? The answer is yes, the session will be recorded. You'll be able to watch the session on the ACMA's YouTube page as well as on the ACMA's website, which is medicalaffairsspecialist.org or acmalifesciences.org. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the use cases for evidence generation. Evidence generation, of course, is a very pivotal and key area within medical affairs. It supports regulatory submissions and approvals. It provides credible information ultimately to healthcare providers to help inform them to be able to make better clinical decisions. It helps to also influence reimbursement decisions and healthcare policy. I know, at least here in the United States, where I'm based, one of the biggest challenges for pharmaceutical companies is around market access and reimbursement. And of course, the information, the clinical information that's submitted oftentimes to payers, to government agencies, plays a critical role in determining ultimately whether that drug is going to be successful at launch. And then finally, the element of patient outcomes. If you guys follow me on my social media, Instagram or TikTok, I recently talked about a story of how impactful patients are when they're presenting information to the regulatory bodies. And I talked about a story where a patient had, come with us to the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and talked about her experience being on our drug and how it changed her life. And really, I think more and more today around the world, patients are playing a much greater role in terms of helping to impact clinical endpoints with a greater focus on patient outcomes. Now, what are the 4 ways to generate evidence? So first and foremost, again, talking about patient-reported outcomes. Patient-reported outcomes, again, this is data that's collected directly, focused on things that are impacting patients in their day-to-day lives. So, for example, I was in a certain situation where I couldn't, walk a certain period, a certain amount, for example, a certain distance, or I couldn't do certain day-to-day activities of living. And now I'm able to do those to a much greater degree. Those are becoming more and more important, especially as it relates to whether or not these drugs are impacting patient lives. The next area, of course, is real world evidence. And this is data collected from real world clinical practice and really is critical because it helps us to understand whether the drug is behaving in a way that is reflective of what we see in the clinical trials that are submitted for submission and approval. And then the next area is health economic outcomes research. So again, analyzing the pharmacoeconomic impact of healthcare interventions. And then finally, as we know within medical affairs, we have our phase 3B, phase 4 studies and our investigator initiated studies. And of course, medical affairs and MSL teams play a really important role there in helping to generate evidence further, whether it's for providing more information to healthcare providers to make better decisions, or from a business perspective, right, whether it's to help them advance the indication for the product, expand the indication for a particular product. When we look at evidence generation planning and we look at, what are some of the evidence generation activities that impact the industry. Although many evidence generation activities sit outside the department necessarily, medical affairs leaders are well positioned to identify evidence gaps because of their deep knowledge of the physician's experiences, the patient journey, and the payer needs. And all these ultimately drive initiatives that help to change um, what information is going to go out to the healthcare providers. And it also helps to support cross functional teams as well. Many leaders develop evidence generation plans, unfortunately, in silos, and that can, have a negative effect. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And based on data that's been collected by several firms, including the ACMA, only 20% of leading pharmaceutical companies develop a truly cross-functional integrated evidence generation plan across the life cycle of a product. I found this number staggering that it was only 20%. So again, I think a lot of opportunity for improvement. And by 2030, we've seen this, in the last 12 to 18 months, the impact of AI. But by 2030, AI tools, it's predicted, will scan databases and be much more precise in being able to find safety signals and being able to help medical affairs leaders better design clinical trials. I know when I worked within rare diseases, for example, several years ago, this was a big challenge for us to design a clinical trial that would be acceptable to the FDA. So I'm really excited to jump into the panel questions section now and hear from our esteemed experts on evidence generation. So I'm going to direct our first question to Dr. Hazem. If you can kind of give us your perspective, Dr. Hazem, if you could please explain and define from your standpoint what evidence generation is within the context of medical affairs and how it differs from traditional clinical trials.
Yeah, thank you a lot again, Dr. William, and thank you for the introduction. So, I do believe that evidence generation in medical affairs refers to a systematic approach to producing data that mainly demonstrate the value of products or intervention in real world settings, so in real life settings. So, it's truly unlike the traditional clinical trials and the randomized controlled trials, which focus on controlled environments and more strict protocol to test the efficacy, safety, and tolerability of a molecule. So, in addition to that, evidence generation incorporates a broader range of methodologies, including the observational studies, real world evidence, and qualitative research. So, this approach evaluates treatment performance in everyday clinical practice in real life setting, addressing actual patient outcomes and healthcare needs. And if you would like to mention a simple example from the diabetes as a therapy area, when comparing sulfonylureas in traditional clinical trials and in randomized controlled trials versus the real world evidence, we observe that patients in clinical trials tend to be more controlled regarding the HbA1c levels, which is in contrast on the opposite side with real world data reveal that patients often intentionally miss some doses due to their concerns about the hypoglycemia side effects that is mainly well-known associated side effects with sulfonylureas. So this highlights the importance of the evidence generation as a valuable complement, as a complementary to the traditional clinical trials, providing more insights that help the treating physician to take the most appropriate and the most relevant clinical decision making and also improve the patient care in real world settings. So this in brief the differences between the evidence generation and the traditional clinical trials.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think the example there that you used with sulfonylurea in terms of diabetes care is really a good one. Now, Dr. Arsalan, you've had experience obviously working within the Middle East region for some time. From your standpoint, talk to us a little bit about some of the key challenges that medical affairs professionals face when it comes to evidence generation in the Middle East.
Thank you, Vivian. So there are two challenges, and I'll put them into two buckets. One is towards the healthcare ecosystem itself, in which we are all playing, and one is towards our pavilion, where all of us as medical associates from different companies we are playing. The challenge on the other side of ecosystem is lack of sometime interest and lack of time. So if you speak with a healthcare professional, all of them they are interested, but how much intent is there to participate and distribute some of their valuable time to generate that data? and they don't see the far end, that how will it be helpful for them to have this a piece of evidence that will pave their way for a better patient care. And this side, on our side of the pavilion, is the lack of expertise. And I have no been in this industry for 14, 15 years with the medical affairs. I can tell you, we all have been in this turmoil or in dilemma of generating data, but there is no systematic approach that leads to, okay, what is level 1 and what is level 10? We all are learning through trial and error basis. So these are both, on both sides. These are the challenges, and definitely we'll speak more when we go down the road and other questions. And Armor and Hazem will shed more light on those aspects, because I'm just opening a new Pandora box on of two sides. So I'm sure they will have more valuable input to add on. I'll leave the floor for them to share their thoughts as well.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Dr.
thank you.
Arsalan. Yeah, I'd like maybe Dr. Amer, we haven't heard from you. It'd be great maybe if you can kind of give your standpoint on some of the challenges you see within the Middle East region related to this issue.
Sure thing. Thank you. I think Dr. Arslan has mentioned one of the most important pain points that we suffer when we discuss plans for evidence generation. And, there are other challenges that could be related to the region complexity itself. We're talking about the region, not a country. So, navigating those complex regulatory frameworks, in addition to ensuring the compliance with the international standards, this could be time consuming and demanding. In addition to this, maybe cultural factors that we have in the region, we have to acknowledge that we do have some cultural challenges, such as stigma around certain diseases. Maybe you mentioned, Dr. Suleiman, rare diseases where we have such types of diseases that could run in a family. So this could impact data collection for us and patient participation in such devastating illnesses.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And one of the things that you brought up was, being able to know whether or not you're operating at certain standards. And from my perspective, working at the ACMA, we work with over 250 pharmaceutical companies, many of which we work with in the region of the Middle East. And I can say, working in the U.S., Europe, the Middle East, South America, we do see that there's definitely differences. And I guess my question, and maybe Dr. Hazem, if you want to address this question, how do you think the leaders of medical affairs within the Middle East region, how do they ensure that they are operating at that benchmark standard? How does that get implemented? I wonder, because I do see that I do see different levels in disparity when it comes to that issue.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Solomon, for this. So, as we said earlier, that the rule of real-world evidence is critical for demonstrating the effectiveness, safety, and tolerability of treatments in actual clinical settings. And we didn't highlight that local healthcare resources utilization and cost-effectiveness analysis are also playing a critical role in our region for new drugs inclusions and approvals. And the second part of your question, to ensure how the generated data is robust and reliable. So you need to make sure that we are utilizing established methodologies for collecting and analyzing the real-world evidence, which means the methodological strictness. So how rigorous is your methodology of analyzing the data? And also, we are trying to ensure the collaboration and partner with local institutions and research centers to access data and to gather insights. And I think that this point also is one of the challenges. If I would like to add it to what my colleagues mentioned, the accessibility to data in the Middle East. And to be more reliable, the transparency is very important. And I mean here the transparency, how clearly you communicate the limitations and strengths of the evidence generated to our stakeholders. So mainly to how rigorous is your methodology of analysis, ensure collaboration, and to be more reliable in our communication with our stakeholders and medical experts, scientific leaders.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think it's a nice segue into the next section, of our question panel, which is around best practices in medical affairs and evidence generation. And as you were talking, it reminded me of compliance. And I did forget to mention at the outset of our webinar that all of the opinions that are expressed here by any of the panelists are their own and not reflective of their company, by the way. So these are their own opinions and not in any way reflective of any of the companies that they work for. So I did want to mention that. So we talked, I think, about the first question, which is around evidence generation in the Middle East and how that kind of compares to the U.S. I think Dr. Ahmed brought up a really great point around cultural stigmas around certain diseases, and especially in the Middle East, around rare diseases, which I'll say from my experience when I worked in rare disease, the rare disease that I worked on, I had to go to the Middle East, and I absolutely agree. There's a lot of cultural barriers that makes diagnosis, treatment, and intervention very difficult. And that's definitely presents a challenge, I think, that can potentially be helped by medical affairs through proper education, especially through proper patient education as well. So let's take a look a little bit around maybe the third question I'm going to skip to, which is how do disease areas impact the strategies used for evidence generation? And maybe here, I'll go back to you, Dr. Ahmed, if you want to maybe expand on this a little bit, because when you talk about disease areas, different diseases are going to need a different approach oftentimes when it relates to evidence generation. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. For instance, if
For
you're
sure.
dealing with a
Yeah,
chronic disease versus where you're using a typical oral agent versus a biologic, or a biosimilar versus rare disease versus devices, and dealing with things where advanced genetic testing, how does all that get played into that? I know when I worked in hyperlipidemia, for example, years ago, at AbbVie, we used to use it, we tried to promote advanced lipid testing, and that played into evidence generation. And I think today especially, there's this intercalation of these different areas. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Ahmed?
for sure. Thank you, Dr. Sama. I think Dr. Hazem has mentioned a very good, true example about chronic diseases, and maybe he dwelled into the differences between the need of RWE versus RCT for such chronic diseases. It's also has an impact on strategies. So chronic diseases often benefit, for example, from a large-scale regional registries, enabling the collection of extensive real-world data. While on the other hand, as you mentioned, Dr. Suleiman, maybe rare diseases could require international collaboration, regional collaboration, in order to gather sufficient data due to the smaller patient population. Maybe if you go further into the surgical or even procedural based conditions, such as, for example, the short bowel syndrome, there is a necessity to capture outcomes related to the post-operative care, nutritional management, as well as quality of life. So you were talking about even the needs of different lab tests and so on and so forth, maybe some complex conditions with comorbidities. We're talking here, for example, autoimmune disorders, IBD, RA, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis. These often involve, polypharmacy, so requiring robust methods in order to address such complexities in real-world evidence is necessary, and even tailoring our strategies to those diverse needs. This will ensure us to have the great insights that we needed, and to be more relevant and actionable. So yes, the strategies are impacted by the type of disease areas we are uh, dealing with.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Arsalan, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, another very important point. When we speak to our healthcare professionals, what are we missing in a real world data or real world generation? By the way, we need to define that for the participants, because there will be some youngsters as well. What are the differences of real world data and real world evidence? However, when we speak with healthcare professionals, what are we missing in clinical trials, randomized or controlled clinical trials? The most common comment is we do not have our patients participating or participated in those clinical trials. So if we are designing a regional clinical trial, we need to make sure to have that diversity to address that part. That is really, really very important, that we need to start thinking beyond the country at the region, because that Middle East part, do have similar sort of patient profiles. So if one country is planning, that can be addressable in other countries as well. So whenever we are we are planning a real world evidence or real world data, we need to collaborate within the region to address a bigger patient population that will serve for the whole organization.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue to the next area, which is on stakeholders and engaging different stakeholders. Now, for those people that are listening out there, traditionally, when I think back to the early 2000s when I first got into the industries, this is over 20 years ago, we were going out and meeting with key opinion leaders. We used to call them key opinion leaders. Now the term has changed to external experts or key decision makers, but it's all the same, right? And we were really focused on mainly physicians, right? Let's be honest. Mainly we were focused on physicians and trying to talk to physicians, even as an MSL, even within medical affairs. But there's been a shift. And I think Dr. Arsalan talked a little bit about one of the key stakeholders, of course, patient advocate groups and patients, but also other stakeholders. And since we know that stakeholder engagement is very critical for evidence generation, whether it's because you have to generate the insights from the stakeholders to know what evidence is going to resonate with them. I remember years ago, I worked on a disease state in the metabolic syndrome area where this drug, the one that we had, was being used in combination with another drug, but we had no data on it. But in real life clinical practice, it was being used in combination, and the KOLs were demanding that we generate evidence in that combination. So, obviously engaging stakeholders is really important at developing a solid evidence generation plan, including other types of stakeholders. And I guess, Dr. Hazem, I'll go back to you. What are the strategies that are currently being used effectively in engaging those key decision makers in the Middle East region? And what do you also see as, I would say, some of the challenges in engaging those stakeholders, and who are those stakeholders? So kind of a threefold question, I know, but I'd
Yeah.
love to get your opinion. So what's the strategy? What are the challenges, and who are those stakeholders?
Yeah, so thank you again, Dr. Solomon, for these questions. It's very important to highlight this. So stakeholders now, the expression or the terminology, we say medical experts, top medical experts, scientific leaders. And now with rare diseases and the emerging therapies, we are focusing on the multidisciplinary team approach. So the stakeholders now include treating physician, clinical pharmacists, nurses, and patient societies, and patient groups as well. So when it comes to the effective strategies, include the creation of the value proposition. So clearly articulate the benefits of participation for your key opinion leaders, including the opportunities for professional development and their contribution to impactful research. And also one of our key strategies is building scientific relationships. So foster long-term scientific relationships through regular scientific communication, plans, and collaboration on key and different medical projects and engagements. And also the tailored engagement. So to put in place customized approaches. So based on the specific interests and needs of your top medical experts in different countries. So those are the main stakeholders, and there's different approaches and the strategies to improve the collaboration with the stakeholders. And I do believe that the challenges is mainly because you asked three parts. So we covered the who are the stakeholders and what are the strategies. And when it comes to the challenges is to really the point that I highlighted, which is customized approaches based on the specific interest. So the challenge that you need to run some market research and some interviews by utilizing your local MSLs to gather insights and to understand what are the challenges in depth through the one-to-one discussions and through the outcomes from a market research that you can conduct surveys and interviews to understand your stakeholders' perspectives and the challenges, and to be flexible. So be prepared to adopt the strategies based on the gathered insights, feedback, and your experts' real-world experiences.
I think that's really, really key. And I'll open this question up to anyone on the panel. How are the MSLs being prepared to do this effectively and in a way that's uniform, right? Because they all have different experiences and backgrounds. What, again, I'll open up to the panel. What are we doing, I guess, as leaders to help prep them so that they have the skills and the training needed to do this effectively?
Dr. Amir, would you
So
like to
would you
take it
like to
first?
start, Arslan, or
No, please, 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 Dr. Amir.
yeah, sure, no worries. Yeah, thank you. So, um, in my opinion, I do agree with you and Dr. Hazem about the different stakeholders. I 100% agree that last 10 years, maybe our stakeholder scope has increased and magnified beyond the treating physician, nurses, pharmacists, even health technology assessment experts to the Ministry of Health, the regulatory authorities, and many other authorities are now being created and developed in order to serve more patients in the best way. Going back to the question about what we can do is we have to explore differences in our stakeholders' expectations, to be honest, and we need to do a thorough needs assessment and engage in regular dialogues with our different stakeholders, as we mentioned earlier, and we can do this through segmenting our HCPs or key stakeholders into specific groups, in addition to tailor the engagements accordingly. Region-specific approaches like again culturally tailored communication, leveraging the local networking and addressing the specific healthcare challenges could be more effective in meeting our needs and the stakeholders' needs in order to align the strategies. Maybe understanding the unique perspectives and priorities of different stakeholders across our region, the Middle East. This will help also to ensure that the evidence generation is processed without any mistakes, if I may say, and it would be more relevant and impactful to our region. So I think we need to focus more about what's needed from the region. If we can combine our answers before and after this question, we need to understand the needs in the different regions and different stakeholders. If I may have some more time, I will dwell into our internal stakeholders as well. This is one of the hot topics maybe we need to discuss as well, our internal stakeholders within the organization that we operate in.
Well, I mean, I'd love to hear from Dr. Arslan, but I think I
Yeah.
want to come back to you because I agree. I think the internal stakeholder element is important as well. But Dr. Arslan, anything to add to what Dr. Ahmed said?
No, I totally agree with my panel experts. Just to highlight your question about our do our MSLs really able to tackle these challenges today? Short answer is no, or I doubtful. Why? Because we are so much dwelled into our day-to-day work that we do not have that structured approaches to teach and to train them according to what might come after 6 months, 1 year, and 1.5 year.
Yeah.
So that as and I've said that in the beginning, and I'll keep pushing that one, that we all need to come up with one action point, that what we need to do in next 6 months, 3 months, 1 month, and that will lead to a betterment, maybe in one aspect. But what Dr. Hazem, Dr. Armour has mentioned, um, internal stakeholders, I do agree. It could be discussed for hours. What are their expectations? What they, if you want to speak with them, they want the data or the evidence yesterday. So the most important thing is to manage expectations at their part, and how
Yeah.
that, yeah, we'll go into discussions. Back to
Yeah,
you, Dr. Veer.
I think I would agree with you. I think from again, like I mentioned before, we work with tens of thousands of MSLs, medical affairs professionals, the ACMA, and one of the things that we do is so I think many people know, as I mentioned earlier, we have of course the BCMAS program, one for individuals, one for enterprise, and one of the things that we found is people love the resources and the tools that we put into the enterprise BCMS program. One of which actually is a step-by-step guide on how to build a medical affairs strategy, and even how to help provide proper metrics as a field MSL manager. So, looking at the skills needed, the KPIs needed, we give guides on how to do that in the BCMAS program for enterprise because we know that that need is there, right? If you have people that are coming from different backgrounds, different experiences, how do you establish that uniformity? How do you benchmark it? This is why I'm a really big believer in having some type of continuous roadmap for professional development, because I think ultimately you can have a great strategy, but if there's no execution, it's going to be difficult to achieve your business objectives, right? There's a great quote. I can't remember who said it, but the quote was, "You don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems," meaning you have to have a good system and structure in place to be able to achieve those goals that you're trying to achieve. And I think having good training and having good a way to benchmark your team's skills is really key. All right, so let's talk about that around educational gaps and to generate meaningful evidence. So, educational gaps are often a driving force behind evidence generation. How do you identify those gaps where healthcare systems and patient outcomes can be improved? So, I think Dr. Ahmed talked a little bit about that, about the issue of doing a needs assessment. So, I thought that was kind of touching on this point. But, Dr. Hazem, if you want to maybe talk a little bit more from your perspective, your experience in the industry, how do you identify those gaps in the Middle East? What are some of the barriers to identifying those gaps?
Yeah, I think if I would like to add some points on what Dr. Amir highlighted. So, identifying educational gaps involve focus groups. So, we can organize focus group discussions with diverse HCPs, as we highlighted, treating physicians, nurses, clinical pharmacists, and to facilitate deeper conversations about their experiences, challenges, and knowledge gap. And this qualitative approach can provide insights into specific areas where education is lacking. Also, as I mentioned previously, interviews through our local medical team. So we can conduct one-to-one interviews with key opinion leaders by our local MSLs and provide our MSLs with tools that can support them in the discussion and to gain expert perspectives on educational needs and gaps within the healthcare landscape, and also the collaboration with institutions and societies. So, if we partner with educational organizations to gather insights on our company or our pharmaceutical company current and our running training programs and their effectiveness, so we can have a feedback about what we are doing in terms of education, and we can amend appropriately in the future medical engagements in terms of the feedback and evaluation that we received from our audience and treating physicians.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think in the end of the day, we know from a lot of data that it really impacts not just the ability to manage the life cycle of the drug successfully, but also in terms of launch. We know that drug launch is very much impacted by being able to identify those educational gaps and skills training early on. Dr. Arsalan, I'll come back to you. What role does ongoing medical education and CE and professional development play in evidence generation in the Middle East?
So the most in our in specifically in the Middle East region, this region is actually the most dynamic in terms of evidence generation. The new policies have been implemented. Every quarter there is a new update, and the people who are working in the Middle East, specifically for Saudi Arabia, there is a new regulation that has been implemented by Saudi FDA that will be effective from 2025, that every new molecule needs to have a local data that needs to reimbursed in the country. That will lead us to, what are we planning? Are we ready? So the short answer, unfortunately, is again no. What are we doing for that? We are making sure that, okay, what have been done, let's put that on the back. Let's plan ahead. Well, the engine of our research and development is going to continue. It is continuing, and we'll have more molecule assets coming up in the future. We need to make sure whatever is happening in future beyond 2025, we need to have this region participated in the evidence generation plans, whether it would be real world data, real world evidence, country specific trials, participation in the surveys, understanding the disease area. We need to participate. And how we will be participating? We need to equip the medical affairs team so that they understand whenever there is an opportunity, tap it hard, bring that home, make it happen, participate, make don't go for the highest yielding HCP in the most reputable center. Go for someone who is interested, who is keen to generate, participate, being a champion from the country, so that you go beyond the center, beyond the big names, and make the country and organization shine. That mindset needs to be embedded within each and every medical affairs, because if you go to Dr. William Suleiman, he might not be available to participate with 10 top 10 pharmaceutical companies for one next 1 year for 15 clinical trials. But if we find out 10 Dr. William Suleiman in 10 different centers who will be participating, generating the data. Eventually, that data will be coming up from the region that will support, that will that will make our position stronger and let those people sit on that table where all the decisions are taken. It's a long answer, but I have to I hope I made it clear uh, what is the situation and what needs to be done.
Yeah,
And
you
I'll see if
have, and
Dr. Amir and Dr. Hazem would like to add anything.
yeah, no, I think you have, and I appreciate your candor. Yeah, Dr. Hazem, Dr. Ammon, anything you guys like to add to that?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think.
yes, if you allow me, sorry, go ahead,
Go
Hamza.
ahead. Okay, so I think one additional point for the internal focus as well. So having a dedicated individual, a dedicated person for evidence generation in each therapy area in the pharmaceutical companies within the medical affairs can greatly enhance also the quality and focus of the evidence generated. So this approach, by having a dedicated person on evidence generation on a specific therapy area with a huge focus, allow for deeper expertise in specific areas, ensuring that the generated evidence is relevant and addresses the unique needs of our top medical experts as well as our patients.
Sure.
Dr. Ammon?
Yeah, thank you. So I totally agree with both of you, and maybe Arslan, you put your finger on the pain. This is something we need to work thoroughly on, and we need to have some sort of a legit, steps towards achieving our goals in uplifting capabilities and putting our region in the heat map of clinical research. To be honest, this region deserves that. We do have the infrastructure, we do have the expertise, and we do have the multinational companies that are planning or aiming to support. What we really need, in my opinion, is to pitch for it, to advertise it in our with our leaders in the region or in the globe as well. We shouldn't assume that everyone knows everything about the region. So we need to pitch. We need to advertise for our region, and in parallel, we need to have a great updates and great development for the late scientific advancements, emerging therapies, not only for HCPs, even for our local medical affairs stars. And let me be honest here, programs like the board certification in medical affairs, this offer structured learning and helps professionals stay updated on the latest evidence and best practices. Such developments not only supports our better evidence generation, but also ensures that our insights derived from such studies could be effectively applied in order to reach our ultimate objective, which is improving patient outcomes in the region. That's what I wanted to add about this point.
Thank you, Dr. Abbott, and I appreciate what you said. And for everyone listening out there, we actually are very honored to be able to say that the ACMA is the first organization actually that has developed a whole plan specifically for the Middle East. And this webinar is the first of its kind to focus on the Middle East region within medical affairs. And I absolutely agree. I think it's one of the most important regions that's emerging as a key player in the medical affairs landscape at a global level. So I think it's really key. And for us, this is one of the reasons why we partnered with Smart Health and now have a regional office there in Saudi Arabia. We're excited about it because we do believe that a lot of that infrastructure that's being built is going to really put the Middle East on the map as first in class in the in medical affairs as a field. All right, last series of questions in the last few minutes that we have left focuses on just that, which is the Middle East itself. And Dr. Amer, I'm going to come back to you because I know you mentioned about some of the cultural barriers potentially that impact evidence generation. But maybe, again, Dr. Amer, we'll start with you, but I'd love to hear Dr. Hazem and Dr. Arsalan's perspective as well. What are some of the other factors, regulatory, cultural, environmental, technical, healthcare system factors, for example, that may impact evidence generation and stakeholder engagement? I know when I was in Egypt probably about 2.5 years ago. And one of the things that I discovered was a lot of the hospitals there had not implemented an electronic medical record system, which made it very difficult
Yeah.
for them to be able to access information quickly. And I don't know, if it's a similar situation in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It seems like there's more advancement in the Saudi Arabia and the UAE region versus, let's say, in Egypt. But I'd love to kind of just hear again from your perspectives what that's like, because I do think that those things play a role. So we'll start with Dr. Ahmed, but again, love to go to Dr. Arslan, Dr. Hazem as well. Dr. Ahmed?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Solomon. And yes, there are. Yeah. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yep.
Yes, yes,
Can you
we
hear
can
me?
hear you. Yes.
Hello. Yeah. Great. Sorry for this bad connection. As you mentioned, Dr. Simon, there are multiple factors that could impact evidence generation and stakeholder engagement. This could include, as you mentioned, the different regulatory requirements across countries. So we're talking about a region. We don't have a unified, regulatory requirements, and again, cultural attitudes. Maybe we dwelled about this earlier. And in addition to the environmental factors that could influence even the disease prevalence. Sorry. And as you mentioned earlier, we have differences in the technology adoption, particularly the EMR or the Unified Electronic Medical Records across sectors. Here in Saudi Arabia, most of the sectors now are developing and having the EMRs. But still, we do have some sectors or institutions that we would benefit from in clinical research. Unfortunately, they do not have such advancements for data collection and analysis, I mean. And such disparities maybe just to shed a light on the future, we do have advancements in the region. I'm talking about here, for example, the Gulf countries. We do have multiple enablers currently and will be expanded in the future. For example, we do have in Saudi Arabia the development of the unified patient files. This will help boost the timelines of clinical studies in Saudi Arabia. Bahrain is also has a good initiative for creating the digital health integration system DHIS. This will help as well in creating a unified health data platform. And if I want to talk about UAE, you have Abu Dhabi, which has launched a 10-year digital transformation strategy. You're talking about AI. Those guys are going beyond what we're thinking of, and within those 10 years, they are planning to have uh, an application or multiple applications or strategy to provide insights driven and value based care to people in the UAE. Even in Oman, they do have an ambitious vision 2040, where they are planning to have a biotech research, to establish a biotech research that can lead to the discovery and development of new drugs tailored to the Omani population's genetic and environmental specs or sorry specifics. And so knowing that there is a great appetite from the governments in the region to advance, and this gives us apart to focus more in order to partner with those entities and governments to work hand in hand to uplift our capabilities and again, as you mentioned, put the region on top of the healthcare, on top of the evidence generation map.
Thank you, Dr. Amer.
I'm
Dr.
sorry for the
Hazem?
very long answer.
No, no, I thought it was great. A lot of good points there. Dr. Hazem?
Yeah, I think Dr. Solomon and Dr. Amir, you covered everything. So the main factors include, as you highlighted, the regulatory frameworks, the cultural attitudes, and the resource availability. But if I would like to focus more on the growing interest now in real-world evidence in our region, as Dr. Amir highlighted, so increasing the recognition of real-world evidence value can lead to more initiatives focused on this particular area. Also, as a part from the pharmaceutical companies, we can enhance this by partnerships and collaboration with local organizations to enhance access to data and technology. Also, some of the pharmaceutical companies nowadays they are providing the sponsorships for local registries in different therapy areas with the Ministry of Health, for example, in Saudi Arabia, to enhance the data availability and to have data where you can generate a lot of data from the registries, and also leveraging the AI nowadays and the data set in order to provide more data from the countries to provide more evidence generation on this piece of analysis and this part of data collection as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Arsalan?
I'll take the question from a different perspective, because what are those factors that are impacting the evidence generation? So there are tons of questions we need to ask ourselves. What are we designing? What are we addressing? How much are we spending, and how much health gain we are receiving or adding to the healthcare ecosystem? What will be the budgetary impact on the organization and on the healthcare ecosystem? If we address, rather than looking at the challenges, ask ourselves these questions, situation and a picture will be more colorful than what we are actually right now looking at. Looking at the challenges, we will ending up with more challenges. Looking at the brighter sides, we will move forward. Believe me, we will move forward. And the participants who are on the call, who will be looking at this recorded session later on, we need to move. Whatever the situation, we have to move. There is no other option for this region, that we are moving in every other aspects of life. In evidence generation, we have to move. We don't need to see the challenges. There are tons of challenges. There will be no budget in the organization. There will be no headcount. There will be no dedicated person for real world evidences. Physicians will not be interested. We will get the approvals very late. We will be limited time to generate the evidence. Internal stakeholders will be giving us, uh, I'll not say the tough time, but those good discussions in the meeting rooms. So there will be challenges, guys. We will not, this this seminar, this webinar will not solve all your problems. The one thing that will solve the problem is to ask yourself set of questions. We are asking those questions to ourselves before planning anything, and believe me, things will move. We just need to move the needle from point A to point B, and believe me, things will change. I know, Dr. Amir, Dr. Hazem, would you'll agree on that point? We have been
Yeah,
trying this for last 10, 15 years in the industry, um, addressing the challenges. Let's change the game. Let's see the brighter side. Let's move ahead. Whatever we have an opportunity, we need to bring this region, as Dr. Amir said, on the heat map of clinical trials. We have the expertise, we have the infrastructure, we have the intention. The only thing, these three things are not connected. Let's let's work as a glue to bond all of these segments and bridge them together and move ahead. And Dr. Solomon, I saw there are some questions on the chat as well. If you like to address those, it'll be
Yeah, I
happy.
was I was gonna say we have about 6 minutes left, so I wanted to address some of the questions. So one of the first questions, I'll go to the last one. It says, "Thank you, Dr. Hazem Wahba, for the ongoing MOH led registries. How do you see the medical affairs your role to utilize these data to support upcoming launches and pre-launch readiness. That's directed to you, Dr. Hazem.
How do you see the medical affairs role to utilize these data to support upcoming launches or launches? So I think once you have the data published or you have any access to the reports from the MOH or from local registries, we can utilize this data as we can see in the Western context in Europe. And it's look again to the questions that Dr. Arsalan highlighted. What are your questions? What is the scientific questions that you are looking for? So once you identify your scientific questions, based on your needs and the therapy area gaps and the unmet needs in your market, you can utilize the data from the registers and you can publish more data and publish more real world evidence based on the data available. So the Middle East has a wealth of opportunities for expanding the scope of evidence generation. And again, as we all highlighted, by leveraging technology advancement, fostering collaboration, conducting trainings, all of these approaches together can enhance the quality and relevance of healthcare evidence in the Middle East and utilizing the data once it's available. So I think the registries will play a very important role in data generation.
Yeah, registry. I was going to say registries, especially actually in rare diseases, play a really important role in trying to understand the natural history and progression of the disease. Um, Another question that we got here: how can we encourage our HCPs to be more enthusiastic towards the concept of evidence generation in the MENA region? So I'll direct that to you, Dr. Ahmed.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for the question. First of all, we cannot encourage all HCPs. So number one, as mentioned earlier by our panelists, is to identify the right stakeholders who do have the need, or who do have a sort of acknowledgement and understanding of what are the benefits of conducting clinical studies. So we need to identify and as I mentioned earlier, segment our HCPs according to their appetite for conducting evidence generation. And then when you discuss this with our HCPs, we need to know about their needs. What do they really need from evidence generation, and how we can liaise between their needs and our regional strategy in order to come up with a very confined way of managing evidence generation. Number three, we can conduct several advisory board meetings, workshops, in order to educate and direct our HCPs on what is good and better for them and for their patients when it comes to evidence generation. So the thing is to have an educated, well experienced, ready potential investigators to be part of your evidence generation plans. So this is in a nutshell how we can make them more enthusiastic in participating in such evidence generation. And
So we have
Arslan and Hazem, if you have any comment on this. Sorry,
We,
Dr.
we,
Salam.
we do have a few other questions. I apologize. I do want to get to one more question. We have about a minute left. It's from Khaled. He says, how can we showcase our global leadership on infrastructure and readiness? So I'm actually going to direct this one to you, Dr. Hazem, to close us out.
So can you elaborate more on the question? So how can we showcase our global leadership on infrastructure and readiness?
Yeah, and I
What
guess
that
he added of conducting evidence generation. So when it comes to, I guess, the Middle East region, how do we show ourselves on stage globally when it comes to that, the fact that we're ready, we have our infrastructure around evidence generation?
Yeah, I think the most important part is the allocation of global trials. I will not talk only about evidence generation or real world evidence, also on the global clinical trials. And nowadays we see our countries like Saudi and UAE on the map of the global in terms of allocation of global clinical trials. So the more attraction from the pharmaceutical companies for more global clinical trials where we can succeed in terms of recruiting patients, this will put us more on the map, on the global map, when we succeed in the recruitment of patients in the global clinical trials by having more education, not only for the healthcare professionals, but also for the patients. So nowadays you have to educate patients on the inclusion in clinical trials. So number one, I do believe that the successful recruitment of more patients in our region when we have local or global clinical trials will be the main different that will differentiate us and put us on the map when it comes to participation in global and local clinical trials.
Yeah, I agree. I think having the systems, the processes, the skills, the training, all that's going to be key to put the folks on in the Middle East on the global scale. With that, I'm going to close out the webinar. For those of you guys that are listening, just so that you're aware, as I mentioned earlier on, the ACMA does have a regional office in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So again, we do have a regional office in Riyadh, and our business development head, who's based right there in Saudi Arabia, his name is Mahmoud Gamal. I just actually put his email in the chat there, mahmoud.gamal at acmainfo.org. He's phenomenal, a lot of experience in the industry, came from Novartis. Many of you may know him. And so he's here to support anyone who is interested in collaborating with the ACMA around medical affairs when it comes to education, training, AI, any type of consulting or customized solutions. We work, like I said before, with over 250 pharmaceutical companies around the world. So we're very excited to be in the Middle East, and our goal is to really expand the support that we provide for our partners in the Middle East within the medical affairs, life sciences space. So with that, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank all my esteemed panelists, Dr. Hazem, Dr. Ahmed, and Dr. Arsalan. They were phenomenal. As you guys can see, this content was chock filled with a lot of great and practical information. So we're going to be trying to hold these webinars at least once a quarter. And again, like I mentioned at the outset, this information is going to be provided on the ACMA's website, medicalaffairsspecialist.org, as well as ACMA lifesciences.org, as well as on our ACMA YouTube page. Be sure to follow me. I put a lot of content out every week on the area of medical affairs. I'm on TikTok at William Solomon. So thank you guys very much. And I would ask you to reach out to us with any questions that you have as a follow-up, and we'll try to get back to you. Thanks again, guys. Have a great day.
Thank
Thank
you,
you all.
everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.